Alright, hello everybody, welcome to another video today. My name is Chris, and today we're going to be going over the Lumber Liquidator flooring store closing list as of Tuesday, August 13th, 2024. So the moral of the basis was this company um, is basically going out of business after they filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy on Sunday in Delaware. The company is currently in negotiations with multiple parties to sell the business. They said in a statement. They were in the spotlight of 2019. So yeah. Um, anyways, here is the closing list. So in the state of Alabama, we have the Lumber Liquidator store in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, the Lumber Liquidator store in Mesa, Arizona, the Lumber Liquidator store in Phoenix, Arizona, the Lumber Liquidator store in Prescott, Arizona, the Lumber Liquidator store in Bakersfield, California, the Lumber Liquidator store in Burlingame, California, the Lumber Liquidator store in Elk Grove, California, the Lumber Liquidator store in Fairfield, California, the Lumber Liquidator stores in Fresno, California, the Lumber Liquidator stores in Rancho Cucamonga, California, the Lumber Liquidator store in Salinas, California, the Lumber Liquidator store in South San Diego, California, the Lumber Liquidator store in Santee, California, the Lumber Liquidator store in Torrance, California, and the Lumber Liquidator store in Visalia, California. I hate these ads. The Lumber Liquidator store in Longmont, Colorado, the Lumber Liquidator store in Loveland, Colorado, and the Lumber Liquidator store in Thornton, Colorado. The Lumber Liquidator store in Milford, Connecticut, the Lumber Liquidator store in North Haven, Connecticut, the Lumber Liquidator store in Norwalk, Connecticut, the Lumber Liquidator store in Waterbury, Connecticut, the Lumber Liquidator store in Clearwater, Florida, the Lumber Liquidator store in Florida City, Florida, the Lumber Liquidator store in Gainesville, Florida, the Lumber Liquidator store in St. Augustine, Florida, and the Lumber Liquidator store in Tampa, Florida. The Lumber Liquidator store in Cumming, Georgia, the Lumber Liquidator store in Roswell, Georgia, the Lumber Liquidator store in Bloomington, Indiana, the Lumber Liquidator stores in Champaign, Illinois, the Lumber Liquidator store in Crystal Lake, Illinois, the Lumber Liquidator store in East Peoria, Illinois, the Lumber Liquidator store in Giovanna, Illinois, the Lumber Liquidator store in Magdalene, Illinois, and the Lumber Liquidators in South Allegan, Illinois. The Lumber Liquidator store in Greenwood, Indiana, the Lumber Liquidator store in Lafayette, Indiana, and the Lumber Liquidator store in Monice, Indiana. The Lumber Liquidator store in Daveport, Iowa, the Lumber Liquidator store in Bouchard, Louisiana, and the Lumber Liquidator store in Lake Charles, Louisiana. The Lumber Liquidator store in Framingham, Massachusetts, and the Lumber Liquidator store in Leominster, Massachusetts. The Lumber Liquidator store in Englewood, Maryland, and the Lumber Liquidator store in Lutherville, Maryland. The Lumber Liquidator store in Battle Creek, Michigan, and the Lumber Liquidator store in Kentwood, Michigan. The Lumber Liquidator store in Chessahan, Minnesota, and the Lumber Liquidator store in Rochester, Minnesota, the Lumber Liquidator store in Chessahan, Minnesota, and the Lumber Liquidator store in St. Cloud, Minnesota. The Lumber Liquidator store in Haytonsburg, Mississippi, the Lumber Liquidator store in Chesterfield, Missouri, the Lumber Liquidator store in Joplin, Missouri, and the Lumber Liquidator store in North Kansas, Missouri. The Lumber Liquidator store in Las Vegas, Nevada, the Lumber Liquidator store in Mount Holly, New Jersey, the Lumber Liquidator store in Woodbridge, New Jersey, the Lumber Liquidator store in Woodbury, New Jersey, the Lumber Liquidator store in Medford, New York, the Lumber Liquidator store in New Hartford, New York, the Lumber Liquidator store in Staten Island, New York, and the Lumber Liquidator store in Westbury, New York. The Lumber Liquidator store in Burlington, North Carolina, the Lumber Liquidator store in Southeast Cincinnati, Ohio, the Lumber Liquidator store in West Columbus, Ohio, the Lumber Liquidator store in Reynoldsburg, Ohio, and the Lumber Liquidator store in Sullen, Ohio, the Lumber Liquidator store in Albany, Oregon, the Lumber Liquidator store in Exton, Pennsylvania, the Lumber Liquidator store in Fairless Hills, Pennsylvania, and the Lumber Liquidator store in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The Lumber Liquidator store in Clarksville, Tennessee, the Lumber Liquidator store in Franklin, Tennessee, and the Lumber Liquidator store in Jackson, Tennessee. The Lumber Liquidator store in Alpine, Texas, the Lumber Liquidator store in Arlington, Texas, the Lumber Liquidator store in College Station, Texas, the Lumber Liquidator store in Denton, Texas, the Lumber Liquidator store in Fort Worth, Texas, the Lumber Liquidator store in Houston, Galleria, Texas, the Lumber Liquidator store in Cathy, Texas, the Lumber Liquidator store in Killeen, Texas, the Lumber Liquidator store in McAllen, Texas, the Lumber Liquidator store in South San Antonio, Texas, and the Lumber Liquidator store in Sherman, Texas. The Lumber Liquidator store in Riverdale, Utah, the Lumber Liquidator store in Woodbridge, Virginia, the Lumber Liquidator store in Bellingham, Washington State, the Lumber Liquidator store in Olympia, Washington State, and the Lumber Liquidator store in Yakima, Washington State. the Lumber Liquidators store in Berkeley, West Virginia, the Lumber Liquidators store in Parksburg, West Virginia, and the Lumber Liquidators store in Manu Falls, Wisconsin. So these are all of the Lumber Liquidator stores that will be closing as of Tuesday, August 13th, 2024. Link in the description below. I want to sincerely thank you guys for watching, and that will be it.